Well, once again, we come to our Heart of a Shepherd daily devotional, and it's taken today from only one chapter for our scripture reading. That is 2 Samuel chapter 9. Now, our devotional title is Keeping Promises, Integrity with Compassion. I do want to take a moment and invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel at Heart of a Shepherd, and also to subscribe to the daily devotionals that I publish at heartofashepherd.com. It would be a joy to have you being a part of our reading family. Well, let's pick up our study, 2 Samuel chapter 9. Resting from his victories on the battlefield and enjoying the blessings of the Lord on his household, David's heart became reflective. Now, we're not told what stirred the king to remember his friend, but a vow he made to Jonathan, the late son of King Saul, moved him to ask, 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, "Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now, if you have followed heartofashepherd.com, you may remember the occasion of David's vow to his friend. Jonathan found in David a kindred spirit, and the prince admired the young shepherd who slew the Philistine giant Goliath. However, as David's popularity grew in Israel, his presence in the palace increasingly provoked Saul's jealousy, and the king sought to slay him. Well, despite his father's malice, Jonathan accepted David as his peer, later demonstrating his unselfish love for him and acknowledged he would succeed to the throne of Israel. Now, 1 Samuel chapter 20 recorded David's final meeting with Jonathan before his death. At that time, David was a fugitive from the palace and sought refuge in the wilderness after barely escaping with his life. Well, knowing his father meant to slay David, Jonathan sought from him a covenant that when he would be king, David would not cut off that is, his kindness from Jonathan's house forever. Literally, don't cut off my family. And that brings us to 2 Samuel chapter 9. Here we have in the first four verses David's inquiry into the household of Jonathan. When I read, and I quote, "Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" I'm reminded of the manner of man David was. The house of Saul had been his enemy, but his friendship with Jonathan stirred in his heart a desire to show mercy and compassion to any that might be alive from Saul's lineage. Now, one named Ziba, a servant of Saul, was summoned to appear before David, and he brought news that a son of Jonathan still lived. And we read, though, in verse 3, still he was lame on his feet. You see, Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, had been dropped by his nurse when she fled the palace after receiving news that Saul and his sons had been slain in battle, 2 Samuel chapter 4. Now, kings of ancient times would have slain their rivals to the throne, but not David. He desired to show the kindness of God unto him, verse 3. And so what manner of man was the king? Now, he was, I remind you, of what we read in 1 Samuel 13 and verse 14, that David was a man after God's own heart. And then consider with me verses 4 through 8, where we have this meeting of David with Mephibosheth. And I've titled this portion of the chapter, David's Compassion for Mephibosheth. Now, Mephibosheth, who had spent his life crippled, must have been frightened when he received the summons to appear in David's court. Now, limping his way through the palace court, as Mephibosheth made his way into the king's presence, most likely around 21 years old, Mephibosheth fell on his face, and we read that he did reverence. And then David said to Mephibosheth, and he answered, "Behold, thy servant," verse 6. Now, David sensed Mephibosheth's fear, and he spoke words of comfort to him, saying, and I quote, "Fear not, for I will surely show thee kindness for Jonathan thy father's sake, and will restore thee all the land of Saul thy father, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually." Verse 7. What a grand gesture of mercy and grace. Mephibosheth, the grandson of Saul, David's enemy, but the son of his beloved friend Jonathan, was no longer a frightened soul dependent on the charity of others. By the king's edict, Mephibosheth was heir to his grandfather's royal lands and would be served at the king's table. In humiliation, Mephibosheth wondered aloud why David would show kindness to a man who was no more worthy than a dead dog, in verse 8. And then we consider then David's provision for Mephibosheth, recorded in chapter 9 of 2 Samuel, verses 9 through 13. You see, with his father and grandfather's lands restored, Mephibosheth needed servants to care for his estate. And therefore David commanded Ziba, or Ziba, as I've said, Saul's servants, his sons, and his servants to look after Mephibosheth's interest in his inheritance, the estate. Now, a closing thought for you. Unlike our day when those with physical challenges often flourish in their pursuits, men like Mephibosheth were shunned in ancient times. The thought of a lame man sitting at the king's table would have been unthinkable in any other kingdom, but not that of David. You see, the king remembered his covenant with Jonathan, and his integrity demanded that he fulfill his vow even to a disabled son. Herein was grace. For Mephibosheth was honored as though numbered among, and I quote, the king's sons. And he did eat continually at the king's table, and was lame on both his feet. What manner of man was David? Though king, he remained loyal, compassionate, caring, faithful, and true. And I close with only one question today. Can the same be said of you? Well, thank you for being a part of today's devotional. I pray that it's been an encouragement, challenging, maybe even convicting. And I do invite you to join me by subscribing to heartofashepherd.com. The Lord bless you. Have a great day, and bye-bye.